Education Coordinator here at Moms for America. We are so delighted to be able to invite you into this space today to talk about a very sensitive and difficult subject for everyone. And before we get started, I just did want to mention one thing. This is, of course, can be a very triggering topic. And so please know, this webinar will address the topic of abortion trauma, which may be emotionally difficult for some participants. We recognize that discussing this subject can bring up a wide range of feelings and personal experiences, and we want to ensure that you feel supported and safe throughout this session. Please know that it is okay to step away or take breaks if you need to. If you find that you are feeling overwhelmed or in crisis, help is available. We encourage you to reach out to a mental health professional or utilize the helpline listed below. H3 helpline is at 866-721-7881. Your well-being is our priority, and we are here to support you any way we possibly can. So tonight our chat feature is locked down, so we will be posting links throughout the time. However, the Q&A feature is fully functional. If you have questions or comments, please feel free to use that. There will be a discussion time at the end of this. Immediately following the presentation, we will go into a question and answer session so that you can express yourself how you need to our panelists. So if you have something that you want to remember to be addressed, make sure you type it into the question and answer function, which is at the bottom of your screen. So with all of that said, I would like to welcome into our space right now our representatives from Operation Outcry. We have Molly White, who will be joining me here, and then following Molly will be Mary Browning, both from the Justice Foundation's ministry arm called Operation Outcry. So Molly, I'm going to turn the time over to you.
Well, thank you, Hannah and Moms for America, for inviting Operation Outcry to educate viewers in this 4-part series, Understanding Abortion. My name is Molly White, and I've been involved with Operation Outcry since July of 2001. And during that time, I was the host of Operation Outcry's Faces of Abortion television series. I've served as the Texas State Leader and the leader of the Legislative Listening Sessions, and I currently serve on the Board of Advisors, and I'm the host of the Operation Outcry podcast, More to the Story, What the Abortion Industry Doesn't Tell You, with Molly White. I'm honored to be your host every Monday night, and I encourage all of our viewers to invite everyone you know to join the series. It's going to be life-changing. Now, every Monday during April, you'll be hearing personal abortion stories from women and men of Operation Outcry and important information from leading experts in the field of post-abortion trauma and recovery. Did you know that 45% of all women of childbearing age have had at least one abortion? And over 55% of these abortions have been performed on women of faith. If you experience unexpected emotions such as wanting to stop listening, deep sadness, anger, guilt, remorse, etc., this could be signs that there are some unresolved wounds that God wants to heal. Many of the women and men speaking during the series have had abortions in their past, including myself. We understand that some women and men may get triggered by the topic of abortion. And like Hannah said, we want you to know there's help and healing resources available to you. You can visit operationoutcry.org for a list of recovery programs or call the H3 helpline at 866-721-7881. And this contact information will be available throughout the program and in the chat room. So what is Operation Outcry? Operation Outcry is a project of the Justice Foundation. The Justice Foundation is a pro-life law firm located in San Antonio, Texas. It was launched in the late 2000s for the purpose of collecting declarations from women and men who've been hurt by abortion to use as supporting evidence in a lawsuit filed on behalf of Norma McCorvey, the Roe, and Sandra Cano, Doe, who sought to have their Supreme Court cases, Roe versus Wade and Doe versus Bolton, overturned because their cases were based on lies and fraud, and because abortion kills babies and hurts their mothers, fathers, and families. Operation Outcry has led and participated in pro-life events all over the nation and around the world, using the power of testimony to reveal the truth, change minds, heal the brokenhearted, save lives, and motivate people into action. You will hear more about Operation Outcry and what we've been involved with during Mary Browning's presentation in a couple of minutes. We want to invite everyone listening to this webinar who's had an abortion in your past to join this incredible sisterhood and brotherhood by joining our voices and sharing your story with us by filling out a declaration, which Mary will talk to you about in a little while. Through the power of testimony, we can bring purpose from our pain. I first heard about Operation Outcry in July of 2001 and became the first Operation Outcry woman to share my abortion story at a national pro-life media campaign in Washington, D.C., and that was in September of 2001. Since then, Operation Outcry has opened many doors for me and many others to use our testimonies to educate the public, the church, and lawmakers, and defend pro-life legislation. I've attended over a dozen United Nations events. I've met with global leaders attended global health conferences, and spoke during international pro-life events defending life, motherhood, marriage, and families from global assault. I also got elected as a Texas state representative and wrote a book, Deceived, God Brought Purpose from My Pain. During all of these opportunities, I have witnessed how the power of testimony defeats the abortion narrative. If you've had an abortion, God wants to bring purpose from your pain too. Like Hannah said at the beginning, there will be time for questions and answers after this webinar, and we encourage you to post your questions. I think there might be a little room down there you can post your questions, but we want to encourage you to do that and to stay and participate. Now I'd like to introduce my friend, Mary Browning. Mary Browning is the legal advisor for Operation Outcry, and she's the co-host of our podcast. Mary? Mary, I think you might be muted.
Yes, thank you, Molly. Thank you. Yes, I have been working with Operation Outcry for the past 6 years, and I have the privilege of working with a lot of people who have the experience of abortion. And if you can show that next slide, we're going to talk about a case, the first case where the U.S. Supreme Court identified quotations from the declarations that were filed in amicus briefs that the Justice Foundation filed on behalf of those hurt by abortion. And I'm just going to read the last one, or excuse me, the first one from Teresa. This is testimony that touched the U.S. Supreme Court. Teresa talked about the harm abortion had caused her: depression, nightmares, hospitalization, suicidal thoughts and actions, guilt, anger at myself and those who forced the abortion, fear, eating disorder, alcoholism, low self-esteem, anxiety, and stress. And if you could show the next slide, I wanted our viewers and listeners to see one more quote. It's at the bottom from Kim. She said, "Yes, I was extremely sad, depressed, and suicidal after my abortion. I used drugs and alcohol frequently to numb the feelings." You will see as tonight's episode progresses and through the next few weeks that these are common symptoms that people have and common ways women and men suffer after they had the experience of abortion. The next slide, please. So this case, Gonzalez v. Carhart, the court did identify ways in which they were influenced by the declarations of the people like you and me as I am also a member of Operation Outcry, as I have experienced abortion. But the court said respect for human life finds an ultimate expression in the bond of love the mother has for her child. Whether to have an abortion requires a difficult and painful moral decision. The court also said, while we find no reliable data to measure the phenomenon, it seems unexceptionable to conclude some women come to regret their choice to abort the infant life they once created and sustained. Severe depression and loss of esteem can follow. Next slide, please. I was looking for the declaration, so I may be off on these. Thank you. This is a copy of the declaration. It can be reached at operationoutcry.org. As you can see, there are questions to prompt your filling out the form and then sign it. You can determine whether you want to be referenced in briefs by your whole name, just your first name, just your initials, or you can even indicate if you want to be anonymous. Some of you, like me for many years, may not have told people that you have had this experience, but you can still bring purpose from your pain and lend your voice to the battle by completing a declaration. Next slide, please. So where do we stand on abortion now? And where do we go from here? As Molly mentioned earlier, Roe v. Wade is a decision that was made by the U.S. Supreme Court in 1973. It was the law of the land for almost 50 years. And as part of that, abortion was available in all 50 states, no matter what the state law said, because the U.S. Supreme Court said in 1973 that the right to abortion was found in the U.S. Constitution. In June of 2022, the court reversed that decision and declared that that abortion was not in the Constitution, and the court had been wrong in 1973 when it made that decision. So at that point, the court determined there was no right to abortion in the U.S. Constitution, and the matter went back to the states. So now we are fighting in all the 50 states over the issue of whether there is a right to abortion in the Constitution. Some of you may have already faced this at your ballot, where there have been amendments to put explicitly to put abortion in your Constitution. I live in Missouri, and we did that in November of 2024. But as we look to the future, we look at what is in the Constitution. Is there a right to life in the Constitution? You will see on the screen that the Fifth Amendment, adopted in 1791, says no person shall be deprived of life, liberty, or property without the due process of law. Next slide, please. The next slide is the 14th Amendment, and it also indicates that there is life in the U.S. Constitution. In that way, we are looking at cases that will be coming up before the court to identify that even though the court now has determined that there is not abortion in the Constitution, but there is life in the Constitution. In the 14th Amendment, it's reflected there on the screen. It was adopted in 1868. And like the Fifth Amendment, it talks about not taking life, liberty, or property without due process and equal protection. Due process in our country is really notice and an opportunity to be heard. Whether or not the child in the womb is considered a person and considered a child, even though he or she is at an early stage of development, is yet to be determined by our court. Science has shown us at this stage that once the egg and the sperm come together and there's conception or fertilization, all the components to make a unique human being exist at that point. All the child needs is a warm and safe place to grow with nutrients. Sometimes that's in the beginning, that's within the mother's womb. And the child gets his or her nutrients from the mother. After that, it's out of the womb. And we're familiar with nutrition, air, and water at that stage. So I hope you'll pay attention and watch that as we move forward. The next slide in terms of where we go from here is we really are looking at, well, what is funding this fight that we're in? Planned Parenthood or big abortion has a budget of $2 billion per year. 700 million of those dollars are taxpayer dollars from you and me. The New York Times, in an article within the last 2 months, exposed Planned Parenthood for the lack of services provided to women and girls that came to them because Planned Parenthood spends most of their money fighting. They pay attorneys to fight states like Missouri. After we passed that amendment to our Constitution, they sued us because they didn't want to comply with any of our statutes, even the one that requires a provider of abortion to tell a woman or girl that abortion is the termination of a separate living human being. In South Carolina, the governor there determined that Planned Parenthood was not a qualified medical provider and not entitled to Medicaid dollars because the majority of what Planned Parenthood does is abortion. That case, Planned Parenthood sued South Carolina, and that case went to the US Supreme Court and was argued on April 2nd, just last Wednesday. So keep your ears tuned to see what the outcome of that case is. But in some ways, we are funding the battle by our taxpayer dollars. We're giving Planned Parenthood the money to fight us with. Planned Parenthood, you may or may not know, is a nonprofit. Next slide, please. So currently you may have heard something in the news, or you may receive in emails or newsletters about defunding Planned Parenthood or defunding big abortion. Why would we want to do that? Well, we would want to do that because they're using the money to fight. They're using the money to promote abortion-minded candidates, to influence the public discourse into thinking that abortion is simple and normal, like taking a Tylenol, and to try to not comply with laws that are designed to protect women and girls. Next slide. So we're back to Operation Outcry. Operation Outcry, the Ministry of the Justice Foundation is continuing to fight these battles. And if you want to join us, sign a declaration, operationoutcry.org. You can also find healing resources at that location. Thank you. Back to you, Molly.
Well, thank you, Mary. That was very, very informative. And I just want to throw in another trigger warning here again that, you know, if you're experiencing feelings that rising up from what you've been hearing, then that means you may have some unhealed wounds in your past. And we just want to encourage you to seek healing. And at the operationoutcry.org website, there's a list of resources for abortion recovery available to women and men. And we encourage you to check that out. Next, we're going to have some speakers, several testimonies of women and men, or a man who's going to share their personal abortion experiences. And I'd like to introduce our first speaker, which is Lavette Vassar. Lavette?
Thank you so much, everyone, for allowing me to share. I sit here because I took the life of two of my children. I brought the narrative that I was too young, too poor. What I did know was I was never enough. So you fill in the blank with the too poor, too rich, too whatever. I was raised in a Pentecostal church. We were there every single day. Yet these are the feelings that haunted me. By the age of 16, I was already preparing to become a mother. And I'm just going to be honest with y'all. I would have aborted that child too if it wasn't for a sexually transmitted disease. It's a sad truth, but one that marked the beginning of a downward spiral. I found myself caught in one hopeless relationship after another, which led to my second visit to the abortion clinic. But this time, my mother was pretty firm. There would be no baby shower, only a funeral of what could have been. I remember her clearly, assertive, and unwavering. She was certain baby number two was not going to join our family. As I cried in the abortion clinic, I'll never forget, my mother looked at me with a stern face and said, Because the nurse, let me back up, the nurse sent me back out to my mother because I was crying so much and they could not do the abortion. And so my mother gave me a pretty stern look and she said, Lavette, when you come back tomorrow, you better get it done. What she didn't know, I wasn't just about to end a pregnancy. I was on a suicide mission. I came back, they did an ultrasound, and the one thing the nurse said is, she just keep moving. I knew then, in that moment, was my daughter's last fight for life. And then I went home and attempted to end my own life. That led to a third abortion clinic trip, this time at Planned Parenthood. I was caught in a downward spiral, just partying, drinking, promiscuous behavior, just more ways I was trying to numb the pain. I was really just on another suicide mission in disguise. But this time I learned. I learned not to cry in the abortion clinic. I cried in the parking lot and went inside and had my second abortion. And then I met a man. No surprise there, right? But this one was different. He loved Jesus. He loved me and my son. And through him, I began to imitate a walk with Jesus. That imitation turned into conviction, and that conviction led to a true relationship with Jesus Christ. The story of redemption in my life has taken me down many paths. And now I'm at the table he has prepared for me, is right now at CareNet, and where I serve as the Associate Director of Abortion Recovery and Care. See, I know according to the United States Survey of Family and Growth, more than 1 in 3 women and 5 in 10 men were attending church at least once a month at the time of their first abortion. CareNet understands the importance of walking alongside those wounded by abortion. This is why we have strategically made 2 8-week Bible study available, one for men and one for women. The first one for men is called Reclaiming Fatherhood. This one helped men dive into those emotions that only men can understand. And the one that helped me is Forgiven and Set Free. This 8-week Bible study helped me learn the characters of God and helped me unpack every single emotions I was feeling and backed it with scripture. So if you know of anybody who's been affected by an abortion, and that means not just the young lady who had it or the father of the aborted baby, but the grandmother, the siblings left behind, the friend that might have drove that person to the abortion clinic, please tell them to reach out to me at abortionhealing.org. Thank you again.
Thank you, Lavette. That was very powerful. And a lot of people, I don't think, realize that abortion hurts men too. And we have a special speaker this evening named Chris Rainey, and he's going to be sharing his abortion story. Chris? We can't hear you, Chris. Maybe turn up your volume.
He needs to unmute.
Yeah, he looks unmuted. No, try to unmute yourself again, Chris. I don't see that. Is there anyone behind the scenes who can unmute Chris?
Give us just a moment.
How about
Okay.
now?
Yeah,
There
we
we
can hear
go.
you now. Great,
Ah.
thank you.
Okay, I'll start again.
Yeah, start again, Chris.
Okay. After high school, I went to college, graduated, and started working. I went back to school for an advanced degree and met my future wife at a restaurant where we both worked. The relationship developed. She became pregnant. My first thought was we needed to abort, having bought into a lot of the world justification over 40 years ago. The decision to abort was made rather quickly. It's just what one did at that time in those circumstances. Neither of us embraced the reality that pregnancy was a person. So, how did I come to that decision? After all, growing up in a small South Texas town, every Sunday we went to Sunday school and church. I even sang in the choir. At that time, abortion just wasn't a topic anywhere, especially not in church. So, yes, I was churched, but more important, I was not taught. I never heard Psalm 139:13 or Jeremiah 1:5, where God clearly states, He knew us and formed us in our mother's womb. He knew us before we were born. 20 years, 3 children later, plus having matured emotionally, spiritually, and attending a solid Bible-based church, I did hear Psalm 139:13 and Jeremiah 1:5. I realized I was hurting from the truth of my abortion. The hurt and guilt was building. However, I also learned of forgiveness and accepted that forgiveness offered by our Savior, Jesus Christ. I volunteered at a pregnancy center and was asked if I had been party to an abortion. To continue, I had to go through an abortion study, which further enabled peace with my past. Plus, this center had a program that mentored abortion wounded women, and as a bonus, I could mentor men as the opportunity progressed. So, not finding men specific studies or men material at that time, I wrote the book, Healing the Father, about what I wish I had been told before the abortion, how I dealt with it, and what I do to maintain my peace from that book. I have been blessed to mentor other abortion wounded men who are referred to me by pregnancy centers and abortion recovery groups. I'm fortunate to be working with men. Men like to fix things. Men want to know what to do about these negative emotions. A shared experience is established, as in you too, me too, almost bond. I get to share with them what worked and continues to work for me from a biblical perspective, in the spirit of it can work for them as it worked for me. This may take multiple conversations over time as I encourage them to engage various steps and continue to stay engaged going forward. I work with men referrals one-on-one over the phone and have been blessed with some successes getting a guy from his emotional ditch to a path where he will reach a peace with his past, heal that wound, and adopt strategies to maintain that peace. With every encounter, I seek to identify other men who can be effective healing mentors as they are healed. To date, I've worked with over 200 guys all over the United States, New Zealand, Canada, one in France, and the France guys via email. The rest of them, except New Zealand, have all been by the phone with a few exceptions. So, thank you for this opportunity to shine light on this sensitive subject. We encourage those with any level of guilt or regret of their abortion experience, a spouse, a friend, or family member, to contact a center or resource that can effectively mentor the abortion wounded. For every abortion, a man is involved, and we are many. I'm Chris Rainey, and my ministry is healingthefather.org. Thank you for letting me be part of this.
Thank you, Chris. We really appreciate you sharing from your heart. Our next speaker is Deb Bryan. Deb?
Thank you, Molly. Well, I grew up in a pastor's family. I was the oldest, the only daughter with 2 younger brothers. I knew right from wrong, and I always wanted to be the good girl. However, I dealt with some rejection issues with one of my brothers, and my father wasn't a very demonstrative dad to his children. Because I wanted everyone to like me, I guess I'll call it approval addiction, I searched for love in the wrong places, and promiscuity became my tactic. I discovered I was pregnant at 21. I was alone and afraid. I couldn't tell my parents. So in that moment of complete desperation, I chose abortion. After I left the clinic, I immediately felt overwhelming guilt, shame, and grief, knowing what I had done to my child was wrong. Because of my brokenness, I continued the same pattern in my life, seeking love this way. I got pregnant again, but I had Jesus in my life, newly in my life, and I was growing spiritually. I decided to keep my baby. But in the background, the original secret was still there. Raising my daughter as a single mom, the pattern of promiscuity was still prevalent. I found myself pregnant again when she was only a 1.5 years old. The father didn't want to be with me, and rejection was my companion once more. I chose abortion for the second time. The stigma of being a single mom to another baby was greater than giving my baby life. The guilt and grief and shame continued to build, and I was so afraid God would take my daughter from me because of what I had done. I became a helicopter mom, hovering and being very overprotective of her. I also was detached from my true feelings of motherly love for my daughter since I had aborted 2 of my children. I married my first husband and seemed to settle into a normal life. I worked on staff at my church and thought this is the way that I was going to pay God back for the abortions. The Holy Spirit gently reminded me later of the truth that Jesus had died for all of my sins. The marriage I was in crumbled and ended in divorce. The search for love immediately brought me into another unplanned pregnancy, another rejection by the father of the baby, and the secret, if revealed in my workplace, would culminate in losing my job, my reputation, and my character. Selfishly, I gave up my 3rd child to abortion. It would be 21 years from my first abortion to the 3rd abortion, living with all the shame, guilt, anger, self-loathing, grief, regret, low self-worth, all the financial struggles, and poor relationships. So in this dark and hopeless place, God met me. I participated in a women's group Bible study like Lavette, Forgiven and Set Free. I saw who God really was, how much he loved me, the journey through the unresolved grief I had carried, and how through his forgiveness, he brought restoration and healing to my heart, my soul, and my life. I also attended Deeper Still, a weekend abortion healing retreat, and there was even more healing. I was seeing joy increase in my life, and the layers of rejection, promiscuity, and loss peeled away. God began to use me to help others, to speak out with boldness about my mess, turning it into my message. I used my voice, sharing my story in many venues and leading Bible studies and retreats for women that are abortion wounded. I have been happily married to my forever husband now for almost 20 years. We have 3 adult daughters, each of them are married, and 4 grandchildren with another on the way. God has blessed me, and I'm thankful to him for what he's done in my life. Thank you for letting me share.
Thank you so much, Deb. And y'all have just heard 3 powerful testimonies, and you've heard the pain that came from abortion. And you also heard how through abortion recovery, God can, restore all those things and make new all those things and heal all of those wounds. And that means there's hope and healing that God has for all of us who've experienced an abortion decision. And my next couple of speakers, they're going to be talking about some further consequences and further risks of abortion. Denise Mountainay, a dear friend of mine from Canada, she's going to be sharing about some of the physical risks of abortion. So welcome, Denise, and come on in.
Great. Thank you so much for having me. And I just feel so blessed to be a part of this important webinar. I did not grow up in a Christian home, but my favorite song is Amazing Grace. That God would forgive me for all of my sins is just amazing. And he has given me the courage to go public and be a voice for children who have no voice. And my story's typical, very similar. Sadly, I was raped at the age of 13. My virginity was stolen. I never gave it away. I was having a sleepover at a girlfriend's house. And after that, I never told anyone about it for years. I kept silent because I felt defiled and ashamed. And even though I was the victim of rape, had my first love at 16, got pregnant, and was planning on keeping this baby. But when I told my mother I was pregnant, she said I should have this operation and forget about it and get on with my life. She made the appointment in a hospital, and I tried to just forget about it and get on with my life. Another boyfriend, a second pregnancy. And when I told him I was pregnant, he went into a fit of rage, yelling, demanding I get out, and he never wanted to see me again. I was devastated. That abortion was so traumatic as I was wide awake in a Buffalo, New York abortion clinic, and I had many complications afterwards. I then spiraled into a deep, deep depression and lots of drugs and alcohol. And I went on a one-night stand, got pregnant, and ignorantly had a third abortion. Yes, that was horrible. But I was ignorant. I was lied to. I was deceived. I was pressured into it like most of us. But in 1987, at the age of 30, I had an encounter with Jesus, and he appeared to me with my 3 aborted children, as old as they would have been at that time. This compelled me to go public and to expose the misinformation from abortion providers and to warn women of the real dangers of abortion. A baby is not a mistake, not a problem, not a burden, not an inconvenience, not a nuisance, not an accident, and not punishment either. Next slide. We are representing millions of women. We were told abortion was safe and that it was just a competition. Most women do not want an abortion, but are pressured into having an abortion. At 16, like I said, my mother said, just have this operation and forget about it. And besides, I thought, well, if it's okay with my mom, the doctor, and the government, I thought it must be okay. I was also, women are deceived into believing the lies. When I asked the doctor what was developed and how far along I was, he said I was about 8, 9 weeks pregnant. I said, what's there? And he said, oh, it's just a competition. Don't worry about it. He lied to me. I had no idea that my baby had a beating heart and arms and legs and fingers and toes. And also, we are ignorant of the truth. They say it's a safe procedure, but I got an infection, damaged cervix, badly scarred uterus. I had 2 lumps removed from my left breast. I suffered years of depression, low self-esteem. I just drank and I didn't care about myself. I just wanted to die, and a lot of self-destructive behavior. 2 of my friends committed suicide years later with the pain and trauma of their abortions. Next slide. So for 38 years now, God has called me out of darkness and into his light to be a voice and to really get the information out about the horrible consequences, including the breast cancer link, premature birth risk, and the mental health issues. Next. Next slide, please. Do you know, next slide. Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, you can continue, Denise. I'm sure they'll catch up.
Okay, great. 1 in 8 women, do you know that 1 in 8 women will be diagnosed with breast cancer in their lifetime? And about 287,500 women are diagnosed with breast cancer in the USA every year. And the Cancer Society say they don't know why this is happening, really. And 8 out of 9, next slide, 8 out of 9 women diagnosed with breast cancer have no family history of breast cancer. And, but the Cancer Societies agree that having your babies under the age of 24 reduces breast cancer, breastfeeding reduces breast cancer. And of course, the more children you have, the more it reduces breast cancer. And sadly, over 43,000 women will die of breast cancer every year across the United States of America. And the first study, next slide, the first study was done in Japan in 1957. That was the year I was born. Don't tell anyone. But the breast cancer link to induced abortion is huge. And it does not mean that every woman who's had an abortion will get breast cancer, or every woman who's had breast cancer has had an abortion. But the risk does increase if you've had an abortion or multiple abortions. And right now, there's not 3 or 4 studies. We're talking about 61 worldwide published studies in peer-reviewed medical journals linking and reporting breast cancer is linked to induced abortion. And 41 of those 61 published studies are what they call statistically significant. That means without a doubt. And China did a huge meta-analysis, and they found that one abortion increases the risk of breast cancer by a whopping 44%. And I bet you've never heard about it. Hardly anyone knows about the breast cancer linked to abortion. This should be on every talk show. This should be on every news channel, because women have a right to know that if they choose an abortion, they could be choosing breast cancer down the road. And the statistics are just so incredible. And you can go to the Breast Cancer Prevention Institute and or ask me if you want to get the links on where you're going to find this. Actually, the next slide. And the truth is that when a woman gets pregnant, 2,000 times the estrogen is naturally pumped into her breasts to become milk for the baby. And for women who have never had a pregnancy, they have an increased risk of getting breast cancer. And so I don't have time to go into the full explanation, but basically, when a woman gets pregnant, 2,000 times the estrogen naturally pumped into the breast become milk for the baby, which make cancer-resistant cells in a full-term pregnancy. However, an induced abortion artificially terminates that pregnancy, and those cells never get to differentiate, and they can become more cancer-vulnerable cells. And there are the two websites where you can get more information on the link between breast cancer and induced abortion. Next slide. Another concern we have, I was at the United Nations in Geneva one year, so a few years ago, and they had this big display about premature births. And there are now 15 million children that are born prematurely every year globally. And about 1 million of the 15 million children will die, and thousands will suffer with disabilities. And again, this doesn't mean that every child that's born prematurely, the mother had an abortion before. However, there are now dozens of studies showing that there is that induced abortion can cause cervical and uterine damage, initiating premature births in subsequent wanted children. And also the Institute in 2007, the Institute of Medicine reported that induced abortion is an immutable medical risk with preterm births. And there was also 4 systematic reviews that found an induced abortion increases the risk of a subsequent premature birth by 36%. These are very high numbers. Next slide. In 2023, there were 373,902 premature births across the United States of America. And some of these children can end up with blindness, deafness, respiratory problems. They can also have autism or cerebral palsy as a result of being premature. And this is costing over $25 billion a year across the United States. And if you look at the numbers, it is so important that we prevent women and get this message out that abortion is not a safe procedure. And it can lead to breast cancer. It can lead to premature births and subsequent wanted children. And then, of course, the next thing are all the physical complications. Next slide. There are so many physical complications. Do you know that 10% of women who have an abortion will have immediate complications? And 1/5 of those are life-threatening, including heavy hemorrhaging, cervical injury, perforation of the uterus, infection, embolisms, and chronic pain. It's also noteworthy that on average, there's an 80% increase in doctor visits and 180% increase in doctor visits for psychosocial reasons after abortion. Self-destructive lifestyles just spiral with women after having an abortion. Promiscuity increases, smoking, drug abuse, eating disorders, alcoholism, sleeping disorders. I went through all of those myself. Infertility and life-threatening reproductive risks. I've had those issues as well. Legal abortion can damage your reproductive organs and cause long-term and sometimes permanent problems. Like I said, many of my friends could never have children after their so-called safe and legal abortion. And they're more likely to experience ectopic pregnancy, infertility, have to have hysterectomies, stillbirths, miscarriages, C-sections, etc. Pelvic inflammatory, they have a higher risk of getting that. Endometriosis, another major maternal health problem. Placenta previa after abortion, there's a 7 to 15 times increase in subsequent pregnancy with this, which can be a life-threatening condition for the mother and baby. And as I mentioned, a preterm birth is huge. And there's also even stronger evidence showing that teenagers who have abortions are twice as likely to experience cervical lacerations, infertility, higher breast cancer risk by 30 to 50% increased risk. They're likely to suffer abuse, alcohol, drugs, have severe nightmares, can affect the relationships with parents and even parenting later on when you can have a child, maybe. And it can also affect your sex life because now abortion is connected to sex. Next slide. The mental problems after legal abortion, the regret, the remorse, the grief, the pain are real because one day it hits you. I'll never forget when I got the revelation, about the reality of fetal development and the grief and remorse that I went to, the wailing, and it was just just very strong.
Denise, we're going to just have maybe a minute or so to wrap up, please, if you don't mind. I hate to rush you. It's been so good, but we're running out of time.
All right. Okay, so Finland reported women who abort their babies are 6 times more likely to commit suicide. The depression is huge, and 65% will suffer post-traumatic stress disorder. But I thank God that there is forgiveness and healing and how God can take our mess and turn it into a message. Next slide. So I've been married for 34 years, been a pro-life speaker for 38 years now, and God blessed us with a handsome son. And I feel so blessed that the Lord gave me another chance to be a mom. Thank you for listening.
Oh, thank you so much, Denise. And that's incredible information. And I just want to let you know that all of our speakers will have their bios and contact information available in the chat for you. But thank you for that information, Denise. And our next guest and next speaker is Dr. Martha Shuping. And Dr. Shuping is going to be talking about violence and trauma related to abortion. Dr. Shuping?
Well, thank you, Molly. And so I am Dr. Shuping, and I'm a medical doctor specializing in psychiatry. I've helped hundreds of women to recover from the effects of abortion, and some men, but most of my work started out with women, and that was a lot of it. I did a year of research training at Harvard Medical School, and I teach psychology at Belmont Abbey College now. So I need to have the slides up, please. Thank you. I'm going to give you a definition for intimate partner violence, which is, we're going to talk about violence and trauma associated with abortion. And intimate partner violence is abbreviated IPV. There is, the definition would be physical, sexual, or psychological abuse of a person by their partner or spouse. Next, there's a graphic. Like most women, Mary didn't want an abortion, but her husband can be very persuasive. And you see the broken lamp. And this is kind of the crux of one of the main things that we're going to talk about today. Next. Okay, so the American College of Obstetrics and Gynecology studied the topic of intimate partner violence and wrote a committee opinion. They actually they wrote two committee opinions that were related to the same topic. One focused especially on intimate partner violence, and another a year later, and they were both reaffirmed in 2022. But the other one was on reproductive coercion that I'll explain in a minute. But in any case, the ACOG is the nickname for that group. One study found that women with unintended pregnancies were 4 times more likely to experience IPV than women whose pregnancies were intended. So there's something about an unintended pregnancy that those women are at higher risk for intimate partner violence. Next. And also then when you look at the women who are seeking abortion, the prevalence of IPV was nearly 3 times greater for women seeking an abortion compared with women who were continuing their pregnancies. And that was also from ACOG, which was reaffirmed in 2022 when they reviewed their committee opinion. Next. And so reproductive coercion is a form of IPV, a subtype in which the male partner uses threats and coercion to enforce his decision regarding pregnancy outcome. And ACOG looked at that and put that in their report, saying that reproductive coercion can include forcing a female partner to terminate a pregnancy when she does not want to, or injuring a female partner in a way that may cause a miscarriage. Next. Okay, so this is a photo of Valerie Kindle, who was in the news. I'm sorry, Valerie Lukenbill, who was in the news after she was beaten repeatedly by her partner, Timothy Kindle. And Kindle admitted that he was trying to cause an abortion. Valerie lived. Some women die from the abuse, but Valerie lived, but her baby died around 24 weeks. Next. And he admitted that he'd punched Valerie in the stomach, intending to terminate her pregnancy, which is what he did. And he was charged with felony assault. And I don't know how that case came out. I was never able to find, but that's just an example of, yeah, this is a real thing. It happens. Next. Okay, so this is a textbook that is written by abortion providers for abortion providers to teach the next generation how to do abortions according to the National Abortion Federation. In this book, they list a number of risk factors that if the risk factor is present before the pregnancy, or before the abortion rather, then that is an indicator that the woman is at increased risk of having those mental health problems after the abortion, that they may be more at risk for adverse psychological effects. And one of the risk factors that's mentioned is perceived coercion. If you feel that you're being coerced to have an abortion, which happens all too often, then it counts. That, you know, if you're getting, you know, your mother, the boyfriend, the husband, if somebody's telling you and kind of putting pressure on you, somebody else outside may look and say, well, it wasn't that bad. She didn't have to have the abortion. But if the woman herself feels coerced, and you can certainly be coerced if there's violence going on in the relationship, if you feel that you're being coerced, then that is a setup. You know, if you're being pushed into an abortion you don't want. And actually, there's some recent research within the last year showing that in this one study, which was a very good study, 66% of the women said that abortion was not their first choice. It was not their preference, and it was not in accordance with their values. So they were being influenced by somebody else in many cases. And there's really the majority of women may be actually having abortions that they didn't want in the first place. That wasn't their idea. Next. But that is damaging to the mental health if you're having a coerced abortion that you did not want. So prior to that study where I said 66%, prior to that, there was a spread from 11% to 64%, many different studies with different amounts, different numbers of women, different populations, you know, that you could check young people, older women, and, you know, you get different researchers had different findings. But the bottom line, if even 11% of abortions were coerced, that would mean that we had more in this country, more than 6 million abortions in the US since 1973 that were coerced abortions. So it affects many women. Next. And so as far as now, the outcome, if you're being pressured to have an abortion you don't want, one of the outcomes, of course, can be that you had an abortion you didn't want. But some women end up losing their lives by resisting an abortion that their partner wanted. And so there was data from Maryland over about a 5 or 6 year period in the 90s where homicide was found to be the leading cause of pregnancy-associated death. And you know that a woman, to be able to get pregnant, you have to be in reasonably good health. And so there's not a lot of things that pregnant women actually do die from. But a pregnant or recently pregnant woman is more likely to be a victim of homicide than to die from any other cause. And in this study, about 20% of all pregnancy-associated deaths were found to be homicides. Next. Okay, so another study looked at the whole US through the decade of the 1990s and found that homicide was a leading cause of injury deaths among pregnant and postpartum women in the US. And so that first year that you've given birth, that's also a dangerous time, a high-risk time. And for that reason, ACOG has asked that doctors, is instructed that medical doctors should be screening women during pregnancy and at their postpartum visits to find out if intimate partner violence is occurring, because it is a very frequent problem, and especially during pregnancy. Next. Okay, so the other thing is that besides homicide being a leading cause of death during pregnancy, in the majority of cases, the murderer is the woman's intimate partner. So it's not just random that somebody's shooting at them because they're pregnant, but it's the intimate partner who may not want a child or may not want to be financially responsible for a child. Next. Okay, an unplanned pregnancy also significantly increases the risk that if there's already intimate partner violence going on, the risk of actually being a victim of homicide increases during pregnancy. Next. Okay, next. Okay, so there was a meta-analysis, which is a big study in which you take data from many different studies and roll it together to reanalyze, so that instead of, maybe one study with only 20 people and another one with 100 people, you end up with one pool that represents maybe 1 million women. But in any case, Hall and his colleagues in 2014 did this meta-analysis in which they looked at 74 different studies. And when the editor wrote a little synopsis at the end of the article, the editor made the comment, overall, the researchers' findings support the concept that violence can lead to pregnancy and to subsequent termination of pregnancy, and that there may be a repetitive cycle of abuse and pregnancy. Because what was found, they did see there was a relationship between abortion and intimate partner violence, but the relationship was even stronger in the case of women who were having multiple abortions. And some women they looked at, they had 3 or more abortions. And with those women, it was an even stronger link with the violence. And it just looked like it may be a repeated cycle. Next. So one of the things that I worry about is that with the new regulations that allow for mifepristone, the abortion pill, being provided even without a doctor visit, and people can call in from another state or log in and across a screen be sent pills by mail. My first thought when I saw this ad was, and who is standing just off screen, maybe in the doorway, a man with a weapon or a man who is himself the weapon? But for abused women who may not want the abortion, they may have an enforcer standing off screen. And it's the same with trafficked women also, that she's going to get pills even if she doesn't want the abortion necessarily. So next. Oxytocin is a hormone that probably most women are familiar with, and you may think about it in terms of labor and delivery or breastfeeding, but it's present in the woman, in the bloodstream, even in very early pregnancy, and it promotes bonding to the baby. And so even long before birth in early pregnancy, there's bonding that's going on for many women, probably most women. Next. And a problem is that maternal fetal attachment can develop, and often does develop, even when the outcome of the pregnancy is abortion. It may be that mom has already said, look, you're going to have an abortion, or that the father of the baby wants the abortion, and this is where it's all headed. And yet the woman can't help herself from bonding, that it's kind of how we're wired, and the hormones help us in that direction. Next. Okay, Stacey Zally is an example of a woman. She died by suicide at age 20. Her suicide note said she wanted to be with her baby. And this was an abortion that she actually did not want, but she was pressured by her boyfriend for an abortion that was against her beliefs, that she didn't want. And the reason we know about the case is that her father sued the abortionist after her death. Next slide. Okay, and I want to show you, there's a lot of research about suicide after abortion. This was from Finland, and this was what Denise was referring to earlier. You can see in the first column on the left, that is the baseline suicide rate among women generally when they're not pregnant. For women who were pregnant and gave birth, the suicide rate is actually lower. For miscarriage, it's a little bit higher, and for abortion, way higher. That is 650% higher compared to women who gave birth. So it's, and they know this in Finland because in this study, they could look at the actual death certificates and look up every pregnancy outcome for the people who committed suicide to be able to track that because of socialized medicine there. Next. I'm going to try very briefly. Okay, and the other thing is the risk of suicide does persist, that we know, for at least 8 years and probably much longer. It may be a lifetime risk, but David Reardon recently did a study that was published in 2025, women in their 40s looking back on their past abortion, and there was increased risk of suicidal ideation. But in this particular study, they had California Medicaid records. They could look at that, track the women over an 8-year period, and that risk of suicide was persisting during that time. Next. Okay, so I want to fly through probably a couple seconds per slide. I want to tell you some of the symptoms that you may recognize in yourselves, in some cases, of post-traumatic stress disorder. And there's clusters of symptoms. One type of symptom is negative alterations in thoughts and moods. So if you're having a persistent negative state like that, maybe unable to experience joy, feeling estranged or detached from others, think about next how that would affect your relationships, like your marriage or the relationship with a boyfriend or fiance. Next. Or even your relationship with your child. And this also brings us to a second cluster of symptoms, which is avoidance. So there's those negative moods and inability to experience joy and attach, but also avoidance is you try to avoid things just automatically that would remind you of the trauma. So if you had a reproductive trauma, whether a miscarriage or abortion or stillbirth, that may be painful for you to see your living children because you're still grieving that first loss. And so you can avoid children, and there's research on this. Next. Avoiding children, avoiding other women who may be pregnant, even in your family, your sister-in-law, your cousin, your sister. Somebody else is pregnant, or a co-worker, and you feel like you can't be around them. Next. Avoiding going in for a gynecology exam because that's a reminder and it brings back, and you may actually have a flashback or a panic attack or something. Next. Hyperarousal is another cluster of symptoms where I think of it as being too much bad energy, that you're kind of all jazzed up. So think about irritable behavior, angry outbursts. Think how that would affect family relationships also and marriages. Next. Hyperarousal also, think of insomnia, women not being able to sleep. Next. This was a study of 57,000 women, and some of them had given childbirth and some had had an abortion. And the women who had abortion had greater sleep disturbance. These were women who had never been treated for sleep disturbance before, but after the abortion, it was the women who aborted who had the greater amount of sleep disturbance, and that lasted, it didn't balance out again until the 4th year after the event. Next. Okay, just a couple more. Hyperarousal. There was a woman whose story was given in the book Forbidden Grief, who said, I cracked up my car 3 times, driving recklessly at extreme speeds, and she punctured her lungs and a bunch of things. And that hyperarousal can include self-destructive behavior. Next. Another cluster of symptoms, re-experiencing the trauma through nightmares. And so many women will have nightmares about dead babies or trying to save babies, but often it is on a theme that's related to what they've experienced. But in any case, nightmares, which can then wake you up at night. So re-experiencing can go hand in hand with the hyperarousal sometimes. Next. And psychological distress at reminders of traumatic events. So again, if that's a reminder of the abortion, if you didn't avoid it, now you're there, it may come back on you, and it's in a form of re-experiencing. Next. Okay, I want to say very, very briefly, quickly, you're going to hear about several different abortion recovery programs. You've already heard about one very good one. There are many good programs out there. The ones I have worked with extensively, even like with my own patients, and have worked with these ministries, Save One and Rachel's Vineyard Ministries, both of those, there is some research data showing that they help to reduce the symptoms of PTSD and shame. But in addition, next slide, Save One and Rachel's Vineyard, Forgiven and Set Free, that one of our previous speakers mentioned, that also there is published research that shows that women who went through Forgiven and Set Free had reduced trauma symptoms and shame. And another good one is Surrendering the Secret. But there are many good programs. So if you found yourself experiencing some of those symptoms, just be aware there are programs that can really help. And there's no judging, because usually the leaders are women who've had abortions themselves. That's not always the case, but almost very often. The leaders are people who've had abortions, and there is not any judging, I can tell you. So thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Dr. Martha Shuping. That was a wealth of information, and I thank you for bringing those abortion recovery resources to the end of your presentation, because we do want you all to know that there is help and healing if you've been triggered by this information. And if you've been learning, I mean, this was a wealth of information that I'm sure many of you were not even aware of. And I want to just say again that the bios of all the speakers tonight with their ministries and contact information will be available in the chat room. And I want to thank all of our speakers and our presenters tonight. I really appreciate you coming on and sharing from your heart.
Nothing, pray for everything, let your requests be known by God, for peace will guard your hearts forever. Whatever is true, pray for everything, let your requests be known by God, for peace will guard your hearts forever. Lord always. Again I say rejoice. Rejoice in the Lord always. Again I say rejoice.